Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 6 of the Early Years Learning Lab. We're here with Angela White. How are we going today?
Awesome. Thanks, Shane.
Thanks so much for coming on. So maybe if you want to talk and just kind of introduce yourself to the audience, what you do, what you're currently doing, all that sort of thing, and just let them know what you're doing with The Right Journey. Was it The Right Journey? Is that the right way of putting it? And that was RITE, wasn't it?
That's it. That's exactly right.
So just introduce yourself and then we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Shane. My name, as you said, Angela White. I'm a teacher, so trained in New Zealand and taught over there as a primary trained teacher, and was the head of middle school at quite a large college over in Christchurch for majority of my career before moving over to Australia. And then I became the CEO of a not-for-profit teachers association over here, where we provided professional development to teachers and so on. And that's kind of led me to narrowing down to my specific field, which really is the role that I'm in now, which is I'm COO of The Right Journey, which is a contemporary rite of passage program for schools. And we're in schools across Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, the UK, Mauritius, Belgium, and
everywhere. So that's crazy.
It's amazing that every country in the world has the same issues with their young adolescents. So
yeah,
that's why we exist. But the really interesting part of that journey, Shane, is that the connection with the early years and how closely linked young adolescence is with the early years. And that's sort of led me to the development of other programs, and one of which is Andrew Lyons' program, The Heroic Habits.
Yeah, awesome. I think we can get into that maybe in a little bit. Just can you maybe take us through, I guess, the moment, or obviously you probably developed this over a few years when you thought, hang on, we need to get into the early years sector. There's some disconnect, or what were you seeing that all of a sudden you thought, okay, let's bring this back to the early years because there's something kind of missing, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work with teachers of 14, 11, 12, 13, 14-year-olds, so that early adolescence, and working with the teachers and in the schools and with parents, seeing issues that we probably all know exist now because we've all got nieces and nephews and we're all, surrounded by people of that age, youngsters of that age. And, in this generation, there are very unique issues that they're dealing with. And a lot of those are around well-being. So, obviously there's anxiety is just off the scale with almost every single young adolescent. And, there's a lot of reasons for that. Some of it's technology and some of it's not. And so there's the anxiety, but there's also the need to articulate themselves on an emotional level or have a level of emotional intelligence. And so that they can actually express how they're feeling. And so that's where majority of our work is, in that relational space of how to develop relationships with those youngsters and give them the language to be able to explain how they're feeling. And as we were doing that, we realized, look, by the time you get to 14, it's not too late. But, what would happen if we did that with 10-year-olds? So then we went back to primary schools and we started working in the primary years. And then we were like, hang on, what if this happened at early childhood? And then suddenly, as we started making connections there, our early childhood colleagues started saying to us, we could use that in our centres. We want to be starting this right here with parents, because a relationship with parents there is so much closer and they can develop those strategies and that vocab with them. And so I've gone into quite a few early childhood centres now and worked with their staff around, what do we do? How do we get this started at the young years? And they've actually found it's been a wonderful tool to help them sort of demystify that world of emotional intelligence.
Yeah, and I guess that would be, obviously you would have had to change the programming and kind of, bring it back to a early years level. How did you, and I guess, was there a bit of trial and error at the start, or did it kind of fit, you think, straight away? Like, how did you get to, I guess, to bring it back to that early education and like early years level?
Yeah, well, we looked, obviously at Bloom's taxonomy of learning, and those, bringing it right down to those lower levels of that taxonomy, which is understanding and recognizing. And so we can almost scaffold it right out to 14-year-olds, where they should and could then be creative with them. But right at the very early years, it's about recognizing and being able to say the words and just understanding it. And it's almost like exposure. It's like mileage. So the more they're exposed to those words, and the more the teachers and the coordinators and centres are talking about it, and the parents as well, the more they understand, what they are and how to use them. We also have icons. So each word. So we've sort of narrowed down the ways of feeling into 18 sort of words, and each word has an icon or an image. And so in the early years, we can use those images really effectively for the students, for the children there as well. So
we talking like a happy hippo or a sad. Yeah, cool.
Something like that. One thing we didn't do, interestingly, was bring down the language of the words. So one of the words is vulnerability.
Okay.
And how to be safely vulnerable. So, sharing what you're thinking and what you're feeling is a vulnerable thing to do. And so we differentiate between how are you safely vulnerable. And so we've kept the words the same. Empathy, for example, we haven't changed them too much, but then the wording within the activities you do, obviously are appropriate.
For the young kids, that's great. And I guess, so when we speak about emotional intelligence, and so what are we, obviously most people I guess would know, but what are we trying to cover off for the kids, and what are we trying to, I guess, get out of the program, and what are we learning that could help, that can help?
Yeah, well, the thing is, if I was to say to you, how are you going today? There's probably a bank of 2 or 3 or maybe 4 words that you might say back to me.
Not bad.
And there you go. And so the thing is, that's the same for children. Yeah. And so they only have a couple of things to say. You're either good or you're bad.
Yeah.
And that's it. And so with emotional intelligence, what we're trying to do is expand that glossary of words, so that some nuances, and there's a range of ways of being. And so to get to understand those, we just need exposure to them. It's like vocab, when we did vocab for English at school, you just learn lots of different words, and then suddenly you start using it in your writing and so on. It's the same approach, but with emotional intelligence, the intellect of your emotions and what those words are, so that children can think, I understand what empathy is. I understand what it means to feel, bad for somebody, or to give them a hug, or to feel sorry for them when they're crying. And centres can then, that word empathy, and if that word's up and it's the word of the week or the month or the term or whatever it is, and there's a lot of activities around that language then also goes home to the parents and says, we're focusing on empathy, for example. And there's books, there's everything you can do around that. But then if the young children in the centre then start to use that, then there's so many things we can do. One is getting strips of paper with the word empathy on it and the icon. And then if a young child shows empathy, then we can draw their attention to it and say, hey, I noticed you went and gave Johnny a hug when he fell off the swing. Here's your strip of paper. And then they make that into a loop, and then we end up with a chain, a visible chain that they can start to see throughout the the term or the week or however long that's going, look at our empathy. Look how many people
Yeah.
are showing empathy in our centre. And you can then say, well, let's do it with the staff as well. We can get the staff to do that, and even the parents, like when the parents are coming in, including them as well. And, that sort of thing that keeps it very visual for the young
For
children.
sure. And kids are such visual learners, especially when like toddler age group or where their vocabulary is quite low or quite they haven't, they've only got a certain amount of words. That visual aspect of things really helps them.
That's right. And even if they never learn the word or say the word, if they see the icon or the picture and they associate that picture with doing nice things, it's the feeling, the feeling is the teacher. And so then they start to realize, oh, that feeling is what we associate with this icon. And this centre really values it, because I then get a strip of paper to put on the chain, and it's like it's not a reward, but it's a visual demonstration of it, and I want to be part of that. And so, that's one way that centres have used it.
Yeah, for sure, which is great. And I think obviously there's a few takeaways. We can explore a few things from there, but I guess the one thing I wanted to touch on is, like, how would you or how have you kind of, obviously we're trying to teach the kids and that sort of stuff, but how have you kind of had the educators jump on board, and then trying to get the parents on board, which is always a tough thing to do for us, because we go into Mini Monstars, we go into childcares and do like sports, music, yoga, gymnastics. So we're obviously the yoga side of things is your like emotional intelligence, your breathing, that sort of stuff. But a lot of it is it's really hard to get the parents to engage with the program. So how have you found, or how have you tried to get them to engage?
Yeah, so bringing the parents on board is really important right from the beginning, and sending them home information about what this is that we're undertaking. If, for example, our program Heroic Habits, what does it mean to be an everyday hero, and what are the emotional intelligences we're trying to sort of get across over the course of the year. So introducing it to them and explaining it to them in a newsletter, and then breaking it down to keep it really simple. So you might do 4 a term, for example, and then each of those 4 could go into your newsletter, and you're using the language of them, and then giving them also suggestions. So one thing we have is suggestions for how parents can carry on the learning at home. And carry the encouragement of understanding what these habits are, and so that they just begin to hear the words. It's really mileage, because the more they hear it, the more it's normalized, and the more likely they're going to be able to use it as they get to those older years of sort of 3 and 4, when they're developing language. That might actually just start using those words themselves, because I've been exposed to them for such a long period of time.
Yeah, that's awesome, because that's to obviously when you run those programs to get the educators on board and to get the center and the parents on board, it's going to just make the whole program kind of work a lot better.
Yeah, and if they can see the purpose, and from everything that we've been doing over the years, we realize that and having asked and surveyed many parents, what do they want for their child? So many of these emotional intelligences come out in that. They want them to be a good friend. They want them to have friends. They want them to be happy or content. And so many of these words come out. And so that when they see what we're doing, they sort of think, that's actually one of my goals as well. And this is going to make it easier for me to do that at home too.
Yeah, to jump on board.
Yeah, it's usually a bringing together of the parents and the staff, because with the very young children in a centre too, it's more about the staff demonstrating that, and still using the language, and in your learning stories as well, which teachers do for their children in early learning centres. You can weave the language of that into your learning stories, and a lot of cases early learning centres have said that's great, because it gives us a framework. It gives us some things to say in addition to what we normally say. So it's really sort of win-win. Everybody's getting more out of it than nothing's being taken away.
Yeah. Well, because I was thinking like emotional intelligence, it's such a word that gets used, but very rarely does it get honed in on. You know what I mean? It gets thrown around, but if you ask me to name the 18 words or whatever it is, I could probably maybe get to 7 or 8, but I wouldn't know the in-depth stuff. So because I haven't been exposed to that, obviously been exposed to emotional intelligence a lot, but like that kind of just that setting, but never have like anyone, we've really dived deep into that during my school time. And you know what I mean?
I do. And that's what we didn't have. And that's what we're trying to give now is, imagine if we did have that. Imagine if we were introduced in the early years to what it means to be all these different ways of being. And, the heroic habits, there's 18 of them just to keep it simple, to have a starting point. But we have another resource called the feeling cards, which is a box with over 300 words in it. And that's 300 different ways of being. And, that also, there's a junior version of that we use with centres too, so that, you realise that there are nuances to how you feel, and they're not always positive either. That's the other thing. There are negative, or what you might call negative or contracting emotions in there. And it's great to be able to just name those, like to just name it and say, yeah, I'm feeling distracted today. I am, got things going on or whatever it is, and just naming it. Yeah. Yeah. And then even, and then not even doing anything with that, but just checking in with yourself and going, that's how I'm feeling, is so important.
Yeah.
And even as staff, and some of the most recent work I've done with early learning centres has just been with the staff.
Yeah. For sure. Well, I think to get the buy-in, I guess we've got to get to the staff and we've got to get to the directors. So how can you, or what would you say to a director or to the educators who may not be, obviously they might want to come on board to your program, but who just want to kind of start small and get the ball kind of rolling within their centre? What are some little nuggets or advice where they could just kind of start getting some things going before they reach out?
Yeah, well, one of the things we know about the teaching profession is that burnout and people leaving the sector is a very real issue. And so if we want to have centres that have got, staff that stay and, then we have to really look at wellbeing. We have to look at, how do we look after our staff? More than that, but how do we actually help them identify what's going on for them and so on. And so there's ways of doing that with the feeling cards, for example, at a staff meeting, using those beforehand so that people can check in. It only takes an extra 5 minutes or 10 minutes, but it sends the message that we do actually care how you're going. And we know that everybody's had a morning, everybody's going to have a night when you go home tonight. Like, life, you don't cut off when you come to work. So just acknowledging that acknowledgement and that honouring of that is enough to, that's better than nothing. It's better than saying, just when you're at work, So
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
So checking in with that is always a good idea. Sorry, I'm not quite sure. But yeah, and the other thing is, having the staff check in. But then the other thing is when you do that and then you put those words back. So, I'll pick a couple of words for how I'm feeling now. It might be distracted and joyful. And then at the staff meeting, you just say, all right, one sentence. I'm distracted because my tax return needs to be done. I'm joyful because my sister's coming to visit.
Yeah.
Then you say, okay, well, if you put those words back in the middle now and you had to choose more, they probably will have changed. And that's how quickly.
Because you've addressed addressed it. Yeah.
Because you had that chance to check in. Now I'm neither of those two things now. I'm something else. And so like it's almost like making that transparent, and shining a light, I guess, on it, so that people realize, feelings are changeable. How I'm feeling now might not be the same in 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 2 hours. And it continues to reinforce that. And I think that is helpful for staff. I think for staff to realize that it's okay to check in. And
Sure.
we have positive feelings, and we also have contracting ones as well. They exist. That's fine.
Yeah.
And just like the others, they'll come and go too. So yeah, there's quite a lot you can do that helps staff to articulate that and to see that in each other and to appreciate each other. One of the things we do actually is love languages with staff. So the 5 languages of love, and then you identify what that is. So if yours is words of affirmation, then if you're on a staff with somebody whose love language is words of affirmation, if they're having a bad day, then you know that saying a few good things to them is probably going to be helpful.
Yeah.
They probably don't want a hug, but saying something good to them or if it's acts of service, then, putting something in their cubbyhole in the staff room, as a nice surprise might be the thing to do for them. So it's just developing the relationships really between the staff, and it helps the overall well-being and health of the whole centre.
For sure. I was actually just thinking early on, the first couple of episodes we did was kind of like the turnover in staff and how that kind of can, negatively impact a centre. And just when you were talking about that, just how much things like what you were just saying could help retain staff and, become a community and like all together within the centre. And that's not even the main goal. It's just kind of one of the things that comes out of, being, doing this sort of thing.
Which happens to be a really, really helpful one. And Sinead, actually, who I think has been on your podcast previously, she one of her goals was staff retention when she was at a centre in Singapore, and it was a massive job because of the cultural differences and so on. Sure. And she had huge success there by developing relational communications between the staff that they just stayed.
Yeah.
Sick days decreased. So I think that is a really good byproduct, and not one that we should, underestimate either, because it ends up being healthier for everybody. For sure.
And I think if you've got a centre that like from director down that are together, that's the top, and I guess all those people involved, that'll help make the whole centre, and what we're obviously everyone in the centres for is for the kids to have a good experience and learn and grow and develop. So like having that, that connection through what you're saying, that's awesome. I think, if anyone gets a takeaway from this episode, that's just another thing that they can kind of implement.
Absolutely.
And so you go. No, I was just saying, so I guess, and then from there, like, I guess, what are we, when's the kids, I guess, 2, 3, 4, 5, are we getting more in depth as we go up I guess, as we grow, as the kids grow? Like, how's the kind of the structure of the program work?
Yeah, well, as they develop and it's age appropriate for them, then the activities and the tasks and the kind of thematic things that are appropriate around the centre, it becomes embedded in, their routine of what they're doing in the centre. Sure. So it does develop more, so that when they're a little bit older, it's a little bit of a sort of recognising what some of those heroic habits are in other people. Yep. So then it's like, when did you notice when somebody was being accepting? So it's not just them now knowing what is acceptance, but it's like, have you noticed anybody? And so then it's extending their kind of capacity a little bit more. So there's lots of opportunity for growth and for challenge. So it's always still a little bit challenging.
Yeah.
But there's also opportunity to just continually embed, and it's cyclic. So,
Yeah.
what you do in there, you come back to, and you keep going round so that you come back to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's we found that centres have found it to be a joyful practice and a
sure.
way of sort of demystifying what emotional intelligences are.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think that what you were saying there about, kind of, I think about that too, is when you're building a skill or wanting to learn something. Obviously, it's about you need repetitiveness. So you've got to have that come back to it. But then you also, how do we get that repetitiveness, but through fun and exciting and challenging ways? And that's always the, not the tricky part, but it's, you want to keep the kids engaged and you want to keep the kids kind of, on the path. So it's about, but obviously the basic skill is there, but it's how we can kind of make that repetitiveness fun that'll keep them on the path and progressing.
Yeah, keep them interested and have it be fun and become a normalised part of their vocab, so that yes, we do talk about feelings. These are some of them. There's so many different ways of being, and it just becomes normalised, so that then our hope is early years is where it starts. It carries on through the primary years. When we get to the 14-year-olds where we're working, then we won't be needing to do anything.
You put your feet up, and they've got it. Yeah. They're running their own classes.
They really need it. They really do it.
Yeah, for sure.
As that develops through, that's the hope for us, is that it actually does need to start down at the early years, and helping early years centres do that is a joy, really, because it's only going to benefit those young people and their parents as they get older.
Yeah, for sure. I was actually just thinking you might have a little bit of, I guess, knowledge on this, but that transition, and I guess you would talk about it because it'd be such a big thing for the transition from a kindergarten. So next year, they're moving into prep. How do you tackle that? Because obviously that's a big thing. I'm not sure. Would you say, because I haven't seen that kind of progression, face to face, but is it like, do you find kids are worried about that sort of thing, or are they excited? What's the kind of general gist, and how would you attack that at a kindergarten age level?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And any transition is major. So if you think about us as adults, a transition, if you go to a new job, for example, you transition to a new job, there's what they call the transitional dip of 3 to 6 months, where when you can be, highly skill-based, but you move into a new position, your productivity will decrease significantly between 3 and 6 months, depending on what the transition's been like for you, because you're in a new place and you've got to get to know new people. It's the relational stuff again. And so with youngsters who are transitioning to school, and as we see it, the middle years at the other end, they transition from primary school to high school. It's the same data and the same dip in the curve. And that dip, we can make that dip shallower by giving them some of the language to help them describe and articulate how they're feeling and what they want. And so part of that is that emotional intelligence, is that they've got a few more words to use, a bit more understanding about the variations and how you can feel. Knowing that anger does go at some point as well is helpful. So it just helps them to navigate that dip in learning, because they will experience that when they go to school. So they go back in terms of achievement by 3 to 6 months. It's 6 months if the transition process is not done well. Be as little as 3 months if they've had visits to the school, if they know who the teacher is, if they have seen other people in their class, if things are labelled and named for them when they get there, all of that. That's really well. But even with all of that in place, there's still going to be a dip in learning, because it's a transition, and it's the same for all of us. If you move house, you've got to find, different where the supermarket is and all of that sort of thing. Your efficiencies, they go down for a bit. So I think having some emotional intelligences in their back pocket is going to serve them well in that transition time, at a time where they might be having to talk to teachers that they haven't met before, or talk to students that they haven't seen before, or demonstrate empathy to someone they don't actually know, or understand, have a level of acceptance for when things don't go their own way, things like that. So I think it's just another feather in their cap that will help make that transition period a little bit less of a dip.
Yeah. And I feel like if they've gone through the program and kind of learned that it's okay to, express their feelings and talk to their, mum or dad or brother or sister or whoever it is, that'll just kind of relieve, it might not, obviously not all the weight, but it'll relieve some of it and make it just a tad easier for the kids.
Yeah. And, the joy of being able to see young people say things like, I'm feeling really frustrated at the moment. I need to walk away. I need to go over here. And them knowing that is, fantastic, because we can then give them the room to do that. But if you haven't got the words, then you can't say it.
For sure. If you don't know the vocab and
it's that vocab and the mileage and the exposure. And I know when I was in the early years and going through primary school, I was not exposed to any emotions, words for emotions at all. You just had to figure it out yourself.
Yeah, I'm trying to think I think I might have had Harold the giraffe. I mean, he used to fly around. Is he still floating about? I think he did something about that, but there wasn't much. Well, yeah. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah.
It's almost like sometimes a tag on. And so we try and think that, what would it be like if this was central to the centre's culture, if it was central to their newsletters, to their everything that they put out in terms of communication. What if it was central to every single topic and that they do when they're doing a topic around spring or whatever? There's some emotional intelligence is attached to that these are the ones we're just going to focus on for this time.
And that's so funny, because obviously it's, and I'm sure you might even touch on it, like spring, summer, it just gives different vibes, and winter, and you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. And, there might be activities you can do that are around certain ones at certain times of the year, that work well. So acceptance is one. Like, what does it mean to be accepting when things don't always go your way? What does it mean to be accepting of other people? And so on. And so, that could be when you've got new people starting in the centre, maybe, or, at certain times of the year, it might be like, well, let's focus on acceptance and continue to demonstrate and use that language around the children for this period of time. So they are adaptable. You can definitely put them in at different times. Yeah.
Did you have anything, I guess, before we kind of wrap up and that sort of thing? Anything else you wanted to touch on? It's been a great chat. I think a lot of educators and directors this is a great episode for them to kind of take on board. But did you have anything else you wanted to let them know? Or I know we've really touched on emotional intelligence today, but you can go further into that, or anything else you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, I just think there's so much that in that realm of emotional intelligences that we can do to support early childhood centres. So yes, we've got a program, but we can also work with centres to develop their own, to just gain a little bit more understanding, to do things in their way, and not have to have a program as such. So
kind of give them a nudge in the right direction type thing.
That's it, and to connect them with some of the other centres that are doing some things, in different parts of the country and overseas. So creating that kind of community, and that's just a joy for us to be able to connect centres and to talk with them, or come in and do a presentation to parents for them. It doesn't have to be a whole program per se of ours, but just doing anything is desirable, and because we see at the other end how helpful it would be to have that at the early years, it'd be fantastic. So fully supportive of anybody wanting to initiate that. And yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And just so I'll tag the link, but to I guess find out a little bit more, what's the website they can just kind of go and have a look at?
Yeah, they can go and have a look at the Right Journey, which is RITE journey.com. And on there they'll see, you know, that we're about contemporary rite of passage for those early teen years, as they start to go, that transition from childhood to adulthood really is what they're at the beginning of. And so they can see on there what we're all about. But we do a lot of talking and speaking and working with educators in general. There's a primary program, and yeah, the heroic habits are something that definitely work in the early years. The feeling cards are also on there, and the junior edition are there with the pictures on them. And that we've actually created those. There's symbol cards. There's lots of resources there that we've developed out of the need from schools and early childhood centres. And yeah, we're always available to talk to anybody or help them.
Yeah, awesome. I'll set the link and I'll tag the link and as stuff when I post the video and all that, so it's easy for them to see. And then finally, I guess this is the last question. It's kind of like the podcast sponsored by Mini Monstars. So it's the Mini Monstars question of the podcast is. So I found this from another podcast. Is who do you think would be good for the podcast? But whoever you say, you have to try and get them on. that's number one. And the second part, and we made this up on the fly in the first episode, is what other topics and discussions do you think would be good for the podcast? Yeah.
So who would I recommend? I actually would recommend my colleague, the creator of The Right Journey, Andrew Lyons.
Yep.
He also has a program which is a sort of a graduation program with each year, which builds resilience.
Yeah.
And so he can speak very well to that. And he does a lot with parents. So that area of, you know, what happens in our family when you turn one, this happens, etc. So he can speak to that, and that idea of building a young person in collaboration with the parents to become an adult at 18, but actually purposely doing things, giving them responsibilities and rights at different year levels. And what does that look like, and how could that happen? So I would highly recommend him talking about that.
For sure. I was actually thinking about the when you were talking about emotions, I think resilience is quite a big one that I think should be taught more, just because when you do become an adult and stuff, the amount of times you do this, doesn't work, you got to keep, you know, it's not just your life just doesn't go like that. There's a lot of get hit down, go again, you know what I mean? So building that resilience, I think, yeah. So when you mentioned that, yeah, I was just actually thinking about that before.
And that's a great topic, and really great to start in the early years as well, when parents are so close to the learning. And what other topics? I just think that idea of resilience.
Yeah, I do think that'll be a good one for sure.
Resourcefulness, you know, what's in your toolkit? What can you pull on? How, you know, ways of solving things.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, thanks so much for coming on. It was a great chat. Yeah, as I said, I think it's going to provide lots of value for everyone. So thanks, and we'll speak later.
Yeah, cheers. Thank you.
So there we have it. Episode number 6 of the Early Years Learning Lab, presented by Mini Monstars. It was great to have Angela on today. Unbelievable. I think one of the really good chats that we've had about emotional intelligence, how we can kind of embed that into the centres, and how staff and centres and directors can use that as well to kind of, you know, gain that retention or keep that retention of staff. And I thought it was a really good episode. As always, you know, subscribe, share, let us know other topics and people that we can get on. But until next time, see you later.